Look through the metallic eye of the future and see a world where every choice has a cinematic consequence. We explore the intersection of human destiny and the cold precision of fate in every frame. Hit subscribe now and change the way you see the world.
Notification came through at 7,014 on a Thursday evening. I know the exact time because I had just checked my watch, annoyed at myself for running 3 minutes behind. My coat was on. My keys were in my hand. The casserole dish I'd spent 2 hours making was sitting on the passenger seat of my car, still warm, wrapped in a dish towel that used to belong to my grandmother. I was already halfway down the front steps of my apartment building when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I almost didn't look. I almost just got in the car and drove the 40 minutes to my uncle's house in Millbrook the way I'd been planning to all week. I almost sat down at that dinner table and eaten the food they put in front of me and never known what was in it. I pulled out my phone expecting a traffic alert. It was my grandmother's accountant, a man named Mr. Croft, who had been managing her finances for 22 years, who had sat across from her at her kitchen table every quarter going over statements, who had been one of the 8 people at her funeral 6 weeks ago. His message was 3 sentences long. Do not go to dinner tonight. Your uncle has a document he wants you to sign. Call me before you do anything. I stood on my front steps in the November cold and read it 3 times. Then I called him. He answered on the first ring, which told me he'd been waiting. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this for 4 days, he said. He sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. I kept hoping I was wrong. I'm not wrong. I sat down on the steps. I didn't care that it was 38 degrees. Tell me. Here is what Mr. Croft told me. My grandmother, her name was Ruth. She was 79. She made the best lemon pound cake I have ever tasted. And she called me every Sunday for as long as I can remember. Had updated her will 8 months before she died. She had left her house in Millbrook, her savings, and the family property upstate to me, not split between her children, not divided, to me alone, with a letter explaining that she had watched her son spend 30 years making decisions that hurt people, and she did not want the thing she had spent her life building to be used the same way. My uncle had known about this for 6 weeks, since the day after the funeral. He had not told me. What he had done, according to Mr. Croft, was spend those 6 weeks working with a notary he apparently knew from some business arrangement, someone willing to do things that notaries are not supposed to do, to draft a document reassigning the property rights. The framing was that I was voluntarily simplifying the estate process by agreeing to transfer the Millbrook house into a family trust administered jointly. My uncle would be the managing trustee. I would have no decision-making authority. The document was 12 pages long and written in language dense enough that most people would skim it, find nothing obviously alarming, and sign. He had planned to present it to me tonight, at dinner, as a family formality. Something to get out of the way before dessert. How do you know all of this? I asked. Because his notary is the husband of my colleague, Mr. Croft said. And she found the file on their shared computer 3 days ago and called me because she knows who your grandmother was to me. I have a copy of the draft document. I've had a real estate attorney look at it. If you sign it, you lose the house. Not immediately, but within 18 months, through a series of steps built into the trust structure, the controlling interest transfers entirely to your uncle, and you would have no legal recourse. I sat there on my cold front steps, and I listened to the sound of traffic on my street, and I thought about the last 6 weeks. I thought about how my uncle had called me the night of the funeral, voice heavy with grief, and said he just wanted to make sure the family stayed together through this. How he had been the one to suggest we do a monthly dinner while everyone was still processing. How he had personally called me twice to confirm I was coming tonight. How his wife, a woman I had never felt fully comfortable around, a woman who laughed a half second too late at jokes and watched you in a way that made you feel itemized, had texted me yesterday to ask if I had any dietary restrictions, as if she hadn't known me for 15 years. I thought about my grandmother's house, the yellow kitchen, the porch where she kept a wind chime made of old spoons, the room upstairs that had been mine every summer from age 6 to age 14, with the slanted ceiling and the window that looked out over the back field. He was going to take it. He had sat at her funeral with tears on his face, and he had already been planning how to take it. I want to be honest about what happened in the next few minutes, because I think people expect that when you realize something like this, you collapse, you cry, you shake. And yes, there was a moment of that. A hot pressure behind my eyes, a feeling like the ground had gone soft under me. I had believed my uncle wanted me there because I was family, because we were both grieving. I had made a casserole. But then something shifted. It was not anger exactly. It was closer to clarity. 3 years of small things suddenly lined up in a row. The summer, I was going to start the process of transferring the deed on the upstate property. My grandmother had suggested it, said she wanted everything organized before she got older. And my uncle had called to tell me she was confused, that she had already changed her mind. And I had believed him without asking her directly. I had believed him because he was her son, and I was her granddaughter, and I assumed he had information I didn't. The time I had asked my grandmother about her will, carefully, during a visit, and she had looked at me with an expression I couldn't read and said my uncle had told her I was asking a lot of questions about the estate. I had never used that phrase. I hadn't asked about the estate. I had asked if she was happy with her financial advisor. The conversation had been brief and completely benign, but he had framed it to make me look greedy. And it had taken me the better part of a year to rebuild that small piece of trust with her. The way he had started calling me kid again in the past year, even though I was 31, in this particular tone that positioned me as young and uncertain. The way he talked about my job. I'm a structural engineer. I have been for 6 years, like it was a hobby I'd wandered into. The way he said things like, "You'll understand when you've been through more." When I expressed an opinion about anything, he hadn't been undermining my confidence randomly. He had been making sure that if I ever had to stand in a room with him and disagree, I would second-guess myself first. I stood up from the front steps. "I'm going to dinner," I told Mr. Croft. A pause. "I don't think I know what I'm doing. Can you give me the real estate attorney on a call in the next hour? And can you send me the draft document right now?" He sent it. I read it in my car, still parked in front of my building, with the heat running. I'm not a contract lawyer, but I am someone who reads technical documents for a living. Building specifications, load calculations, compliance reports. I understood enough. I marched 3 sections on my phone with voice memos to myself. I took screenshots of every page, then I called my cousin. Her name is Willa. She's 20, a sophomore in college, my uncle's younger daughter from his second marriage. She is not like her father. She has her mother's directness and her grandmother's eyes, and she's been quietly miserable in that household since she was old enough to understand the atmosphere in it. She answers my calls immediately, and she tells me the truth, which is rarer than it sounds. She picked up on the second ring. "Are you here yet?" Her voice was low. She was somewhere she didn't want to be overheard. "Not yet." "What's happening there?" "There's a man in my dad's office. He's been there since 5. Dad introduced him as a friend, but he's not a friend. I've never seen him before. And he has a briefcase, and he's been in there with the door closed." Mom set the table for 5. "Has your dad said anything about paperwork? About the house?" A silence. "He told me tonight was to help you feel more supported in managing Grandma's estate, that you'd asked for the family's help." Her voice was careful in the way that meant she already didn't believe it. "You didn't ask for anything, did you?" "No." Another silence. "What do you need me to do?" I told her. I asked her to go into her father's office. She had a reason. She could say she was looking for her laptop charger. She was good at this. She'd been navigating his moods her whole life. And find out the man's full name if she could. And when dinner started, I needed her to sit across from me and not react to anything I said or did, no matter what it looked like. "Willa, if this goes the way I think it might, things could get uncomfortable tonight. I need you to stay calm and I need you to trust me." A breath. "I already trust you more than anyone in that house." "I know. Delete this call." I drove to Millbrook. The thing about my uncle's house is that it is beautiful in a way that is meant to communicate something. It sits on 3 acres, stone exterior, a long gravel drive lined with old oaks that drop their leaves in November like they're performing a scene from a movie. The lights were on in every window, smoke from the chimney. It looked like an advertisement for a family that had it together. I sat in my car at the end of the driveway for a moment. I thought about my grandmother's lemon pound cake, the way she pressed a dish towel to her hands after she'd finished mixing and looked at whatever you'd brought to show her. A report card, a drawing, eventually a set of blueprints, with an attention that made you feel like the most important person in the room. She had known who her son was. She had built something her whole life, specifically to make sure it didn't end up in his hands. The last thing she did, legally, formally, was try to protect what she'd made. I was not going to let that be undone over a dinner my uncle had orchestrated to look like a family gathering. I got out of the car. My uncle opened the door before I knocked. He was wearing a sweater that probably cost more than my first month's rent. He looked relaxed in a particular way that people look relaxed when they have already decided how the evening will end. "There she is," he said and hugged me, and I let him. "Sorry, I'm a bit late," I said. Traffic on the 44 was bad. We were starting to worry. He stepped back and looked at me with the expression I had seen my entire life. Fond, slightly pitying, positioned just slightly above. "You look tired," I smiled. "Long week." Inside, the house was warm and smelled like something roasting. His wife greeted me with a kind of hug that involves mostly shoulders. There was a man in the living room whom my uncle introduced as an old friend helping us with some estate paperwork tonight. Nothing formal. His name was Mr. Foss. He shook my hand with the practiced firmness of someone who does this professionally and looked at me the way a contractor looks at a job site, assessing how long it will take. Willa was standing near the fireplace. She caught my eye for exactly 1 second and then looked away. We sat down to dinner. The food was good. My uncle was in exceptional form, telling stories, asking about my work with a particular tone that suggested he found it charming that I took it seriously, talking about my grandmother in a way that positioned him as the central mourner, the one who really understood her. His wife refilled glasses. Mr. Foss participated politely and occasionally glanced at the briefcase he'd left by the hallway door. About 40 minutes in, my uncle set down his fork and folded his hands on the table. "So," he said, "I thought we could take care of some business tonight while we're all together, just to simplify things moving forward." He looked at me with an expression of warm, reasonable concern. "You've had a lot on your plate since we lost Mom." "We all have. And managing an estate on top of everything else. It's a lot for anyone." "It has been a lot," I said, nodding. What we thought, and the "we" was doing a lot of work in that sentence, is that a family trust structure would actually protect everything better than individual ownership. Fewer tax complications, easier to maintain the properties, and it keeps everything together under one roof, so to speak. He smiled. Mom would have wanted the family to stay connected to these places. Mr. Foss leaned forward and opened the briefcase. "I can walk you through it," he said, drawing out a bound document. "It's fairly standard." I looked at the document. I looked at my uncle. I looked at Willa, who was looking at her plate. "Can I see it?" I said. Mr. Foss slid it across the table. I opened it to page 7, where Mr. Foss slid it across the table. I opened it to page 7, where Mr. Bitt, Crop's attorney, had flagged the first critical clause, the one that established the trustee's unilateral authority over property decisions above a certain dollar threshold. The one that, if you weren't reading carefully, looked like a protection clause, when it was actually a transfer of control. I looked up at my uncle. "Section 4.3, I said pleasantly. "The managing trustee has sole discretion over any transaction or modification involving assets valued above $50,000. That would include any sale, renovation, or transfer of the Millbrook house or the upstate property." My uncle's expression didn't change. He was good. I'll give him that. "That's standard protective language," Mr. Foss said. "It just means decisions can be made efficiently without requiring everyone to sign off on every." "And Section 6.1, I continued, "establishes that the managing trustee role is assigned on appointment and can only be changed by a 2/3 vote of the trust beneficiaries. Since the document names you," I looked at my uncle, "as the initial managing trustee, and there are 3 beneficiaries, I would need both you and your wife to vote to remove you, which means you could never be removed unless you agreed to it." The room was quiet. My uncle picked up his wineglass. "You're reading it very technically." "I'm an engineer. I read things technically." I closed the document and set it on the table. "Grandma left her estate to me. Her will is clear and it's already in probate. I'm not signing this." And there it was. The shift in a space. The warmth didn't disappear so much as it rearranged itself into something harder underneath. "I think you're misunderstanding the intent. I also spoke to Mr. Croft today." I said it quietly. He explained how this document was prepared. "And by whom?" "Mr. Have." Foss went very still. My uncle set down his glass. "Mr. Croft is not part of this family." "No," I said. "But he was part of Grandma's life for 22 years. He's the one she trusted with her actual wishes." I reached into my bag and set my phone on the table, screen up, with a document open on it. "I have a letter she wrote. It was with her will." She wrote it 8 months ago, around the same time she updated the estate plan. I paused. She knew you would do this. My uncle's wife made a small sound. Willa looked up from her plate for the first time. She wrote that she had spoken to you about her intentions, I said, and that you had made clear you disagreed with them. She wrote that she was putting certain things in place specifically because she did not believe you would honor her wishes after she was gone. I looked at him steadily. She loved you. That's in the letter too. She just didn't trust you with the things she'd built. My uncle stood up. I stayed seated. You don't understand what I've done for this family, he said, and his voice had a different quality now, not the warm, authoritative tone from dinner, but something older and rawer. For 30 years, what I've managed, what I've held together, I know what you've done, I said. I also know what you've taken. The property in Saugerties that was supposed to be split between you and Aunt Renata. The business partnership with Grandpa Lou's old colleague that you dissolved without telling anyone. I know about those too. Mr. Croft has records going back a long time. Mr. Foss quietly closed his briefcase. We should probably reschedule, he said to no one in particular, standing up. My uncle turned to him. Something passed across his face. Desperation, recalculation. We haven't. I'm not going to be part of this, Mr. Foss said. He looked at me, and I couldn't tell if it was shame or just self-preservation, but he nodded once and walked to the door. My uncle's wife hadn't moved. She was looking at her dinner plate like she was somewhere else entirely. Willa got up from her chair and came to stand beside me. It was a small gesture. She just stood there, next to my chair, arms at her sides. But my uncle noticed it, and something in him seemed to go out of focus. Willa, he said. I heard all of that, she said. She wasn't loud about it, she said. She wasn't loud about it. She wasn't performing. I've been hearing things like that my whole life and not saying anything because I didn't know what to say or who to tell. But I'm not going to just sit here. The fire in the fireplace was the only sound for a moment. I stood up. I'm going to complete the probate process, I told my uncle. The estate will be settled according to Grandma's will. If you want to contest it, you can hire an attorney and do that through the proper channels. I picked up my phone and put it in my bag. But I'm not signing anything tonight, and I'm not going to pretend I don't know what this dinner was. I looked at him one more time. He was still standing, both hands pressed flat on the dining table, and he looked older than I had ever seen him look. Not guilty, exactly. More like someone standing at the edge of a plan that had collapsed and not yet accepting it. I didn't feel triumph. I want to be accurate about that. I felt something more like grief, actually. The grief of watching someone confirm what you'd been hoping wasn't true about them. I picked up the casserole dish I brought. They hadn't even served it, and I walked to the front door. Willa, I said. Call me when you're ready. She nodded. I left. I sat in my car at the end of the driveway for a few minutes before I drove away. The oaks were dark against a dark sky. The lights in the house went off in the dining room while I was still watching. Then the office light came on. I drove home. In the weeks that followed, the probate process moved forward without complications. My uncle did not contest the will. I don't know if it was because he knew the letter existed, or because he'd already spent enough money on Mr. Foss's services, or because on some level he understood that contesting it would require him to explain what he'd tried to do at that dinner table. Probably some combination. Willa transferred schools at the end of that semester. She lives in the city now, 20 minutes from me, and we have dinner together most weeks. She's studying social work, which surprises no one who actually knows her. I went back to the house in Millbrook in February for the first time since the estate was officially settled. I walked through the yellow kitchen. I stood on the porch with the wind chime made of spoons. I went upstairs and stood in the room with the slanted ceiling and looked out the window at the back field, which was covered in snow. My grandmother had spent a lifetime building something. Not just property, though it was that too, but a record of her actual wishes, documented and protected, specific enough that even the people who wanted to misrepresent them couldn't. She had known it would come to this. She had prepared for it anyway. I've thought a lot about what it means to be the person someone trusts with what they've made. The weight of that. The responsibility to not just receive it, but to actually protect it, the way it was meant to be protected. I'm not going to let it go to waste. The wind chime made a sound in the February air. I stayed on that porch for a long time. There's something I've been thinking about since that night in Millbrook, something I keep coming back to when I'm washing dishes or driving to work or just sitting in the quiet of my apartment. My grandmother knew. She didn't know the exact date, She didn't know it would be a Thursday in November, or that there would be a casserole in my car, or that Willa would be the one standing beside me when it mattered. But she knew the shape of what was coming because she had watched my uncle's patterns for decades. She documented her wishes with a precision that had nothing to do with pessimism and everything to do with clarity. She looked at the people around her and she saw them honestly, and then she acted on what she saw. That is the hardest kind of intelligence. Not the kind you get from school or credentials, but the kind that requires you to stop making excuses for people you love. I spent a long time making excuses. I told myself my uncle was difficult, but well-meaning. I told myself the thing with the Sotheby's property was probably a miscommunication. I told myself that the way he talked to me, that slightly elevated, slightly dismissive tone, was just his personality, not a strategy. Every time I softened something he did, I was choosing comfort over accuracy. I was deciding that a peaceful family dinner was worth more than understanding what was actually happening at that table. What I know now is that willful blindness is not kindness. It doesn't protect the people around you. It just gives the people who would take advantage of you more time to prepare. My uncle didn't become who he is overnight. He built it over years, small decision by small decision, each one a little more comfortable than the last because nothing stopped him. No consequence arrived. No one named it out loud. And the longer that went on, the more completely he convinced himself that what he was doing was reasonable, that he deserved it, that he was owed. There's a cost to that kind of life, though. You can see it if you know what to look for. It's in the way he stood at the end of that dinner table with his hands flat on the surface. Not angry exactly, but lost. Like a man who had been so focused on the outcome he wanted that he had never once considered what would happen if he didn't get it. He had no plan B because he had never genuinely believed he needed one. Preparation is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. Mr. Croft had been carrying that information for 4 days before he reached me. Willa had been watching her father her entire life and quietly cataloging what she saw. I had read 12 pages of legal language in a cold car because I had trained myself to read difficult documents without flinching. None of that felt heroic at the time. It felt like ordinary work. But ordinary work done consistently and honestly is how you build something that holds up when pressure is applied. My grandmother understood that. She built her whole life that way. I think about Willa a lot. 20 years old, standing in her father's house, choosing to step across a room and stand next to someone she trusted. That is not a small thing. It is the kind of choice that costs something in the moment and pays you back over the rest of your life. What I left with that night wasn't just a house. It was a cleaner understanding of what I'm willing to accept and what I'm not, and the knowledge that those two things are entirely within my control. My uncle couldn't take the property because my grandmother had been honest and I had been prepared. That's not luck. That's the result of people choosing, across years, to do the harder and more accurate thing. That's the only inheritance that really can't be taken.